We just dropped episode number 200 of the Uplevel Dairy Podcast. It's 200 conversations with dairy leaders, from CEOs to high-performing managers, immigrants, entrepreneurs, and influencers, even an Olympian. And today I'm summarizing for you the top 7 lessons that I've learned from these incredible leaders. 7 key themes you can apply today at work and at home to increase your energy, clarify your focus, and amplify your impact. Because when you take yourself to a higher level, you bring those around you to a higher version of success and service too. And I do have one important favor to ask. If you have found any value in what we've been sharing here on the Uplevel Dairy Podcast, please take a moment to leave a 5-star rating, or better yet, write a short 1-sentence review in your favorite listening app. If you could please do this, that would be amazing, and so grateful for that. These are the efforts that help us to keep going and growing this show here. So let's get to it today on the Uplevel Dairy Podcast. I'm Peggy Coffeen, and it's my mission to bring you the conversations that will uplevel your skill set and your mindset so you can be a top performer in the dairy farming business. 7 lessons from dairy leaders. Lesson number 7. Great leaders push through, pivot, and persevere. And they expect it of themselves first, as well as their teams. I've gotten to chat a few times with Ellie Purrier St. Pierre, the Vermont dairy farmer who is also an Olympic runner, 2-time member of Team USA, and a multiple record holder. What blew me away about her is her mindset about training. It's actually very simple. For her, it's a job. It's as if her focus on performing at a high level of excellence is so intense that it removes the emotion that others might have, like the fears, the doubts, discouragement. She just simply goes out, puts her head down, and does the work. She executes. She holds herself to the standard of excellence every time, no matter what, on the track and on the farm, even when it gets hard.
I can see it on both sides, on the farm and in training, but I feel like in training, like I definitely lean on my teammates and just know that I'm not alone in whatever the workout is or whatever the challenge is. Like I know that I have teammates to go through it with, the pain, the bad weather, whatever it is. My coach is always saying there's no such thing as bad weather, only soft people. That's what he always says. And so like literally it could be like the worst, nastiest day outside, and I'll just text that in the group chat, and we'll always like get a giggle or something. We always kind of joke about that. But when no, it's really bad outside, but what are you gonna do about it? You can't change it. So you just try to stay positive and lean on my teammates and believe in our abilities to get the job done. But yeah, on the farm, I feel like it's kind of just that same thing. Something that I've learned on the farm that I've brought with me to my running career is it's not always great. Like life is not always great. We kind of just have to roll with it. I think that's something I try to think about when I'm on the farm, or even remind people if I get the chance that, it's farming and we all love it, but sometimes it's just really not, things are just not perfect. And you just have to remind yourself like what you do love and why you're there, and what you're doing is all farming, and it's tough some days.
And that's what happened to Tony Goldstein, a Dutch immigrant who went through a bankruptcy, has battled cancer, and yet continues to find hope. Did you think that you were going to be one of those that didn't make it? There were some folks that came back to the Netherlands and didn't make it. Did you for a moment think that could be me? Or was failure not an option in your mind? And did you have like a confidence of, I'm going to figure this out? Where were you at that time in the way that you viewed the situation and in the outcomes?
I'll be honest with you. I thought a couple of times we have to go back, but it was not really an option, Peggy. We just kept working on it and communicating, and no, it was not an option. I had 3 kids. Youngest one came over here when we were 2.5, when she was 2.5 years old. So she didn't know the life over there. The 2 other ones didn't want to go back. We talked about it at our dinner table a couple of times. What we going to do if we ain't going to make it? We're not going back.
Lesson number 6, great leaders manage risk. Now, of course, we talk about risk management here often with our monthly market updates with Curtis Bosma and High Ground Dairy. But for this conversation, we are expanding the picture of what risk is. We're talking about calculated risks in life and business. And here's a truth that's tucked into this lesson. Our motivation for change comes from getting to the point where we realize that it's a greater risk to stay where we are than to take the next step into a new direction. And when I had the chance to sit down with Tom McCarty from McCarty Family Farms, I asked him about moving his family from Pennsylvania to Kansas 25 years ago, at a time when others would have never dreamed of doing such a thing. And I remember asking him about the risk, is if it was difficult to sell the idea to the bank. His answer was with complete certainty. He didn't see it as a risk because he had done the math. He had taken a calculated risk, ran the numbers over and over again, showed them to a few people whose opinions he respected, and nothing was done on a whim.
A lot of people thought we were insane. I guess, I don't know. I mean, if you do your homework and think and don't worry about the past, just keep rolling.
You knew what you were getting yourselves into when you left.
Sure.
Nothing was on a whim.
Oh, absolutely not. No, I did a lot of math. And I had other people check my numbers, and nobody could find any fault with potential cash flows, expected cash flows, things like that. It's pretty simple math. And it was pretty accurate.
The McCartys may have moved halfway across the country, but some of my other guests have crossed borders and oceans to take the risk of leaving everything they knew in order to forge their own future, all in the pursuit of the American dream, a dream that those of us who were born here too often take for granted. And that's why when I started this podcast, one of my very first guests was Omar Guerrero. I can still hear the story he once told me as I sat down with him at Drake Dairy several years ago about coming from Mexico to Wisconsin as a 20-year-old young man who couldn't speak English, and the owner of that dairy, Jim Drake, saw potential in him. Jim Drake, who was the original owner of Drake Dairy, he identified and empowered you more than 20 years ago when you came here with your wife, Raina, as a milker when this dairy was just at about 400 cows. At that time, I've heard the story from you and Jim before. You didn't speak English. You had just come from Mexico, weren't a citizen. But what you did have was a dream and a vision. And on that day, more than 2 decades ago, you had sat down with Jim and a translator, and Jim asked you a question. He asked you, why do you want to work here at Drake Dairy? And do you remember how you responded?
Yeah, because I want to have the American dream. Yeah. And I got it.
And you do,
But
yeah.
it wasn't easy. I mean, it's about 25 years ago, and it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. Yeah. And you worked hard, but you also worked smart and dug not only in with your hands, but in with your mind, and continue to do so today. Well, Omar has done that and more. 20 years later, he is now a partner in that dairy and an American citizen living that American dream. And another story about taking risks that I have yet to forget was from Elizabeth DeVries, who once shared with us here how difficult it was to leave her homeland, the Netherlands, to leave everything she knew behind in pursuit of a dream. You leave your family, your culture, your language. And she and her husband, JP, lived in a fifth wheel in Texas for those first few years of building out that dream. And that dream is now a global company, 4D Egg. That's 4D Egg World and 4D Egg Fashion. And she's now a U.S. citizen as well. So if you were to ask Tom, Omar, or Elizabeth, they would say the risk was worth the reward.
If you immigrate, you sell your house, you sell your cars. They don't speak the same language here. Now, English is known all over, but as you can hear, I have an accent and I still make little mistakes every day. You let go of your family, your parents, your brothers, your sisters, everything that is normal to you. Yeah, it's not there anymore. So it's first of all, it's building a new life. I must say the first 2 years, everything evolved around the business. We lived in a fifth wheel for 1.5 years. At that moment, it was not a problem at all because all money we had, if we made some money, went back into the building again, our inventory.
Now, lesson number 5. Great leaders know their opponent. Now, this is a lesson that stuck with me from one of our very first interviews here on Uplevel Dairy Podcast with Scott Blevins, dairy manager at Wheezy Brothers Dairy in Wisconsin. Now, he talked about knowing your opponent when it comes to managing mastitis and pathogens and biosolids, and has a strict protocol for culturing to manage those threats. But that way of thinking expands into other areas too. As Scott will say, he wants to know every corner of his dairy, every threat that could be in those corners.
One thing I have heard you say in conversations before is to know your opponent, is to know what you're fighting. And I mean, we could even take the milk quality example for one. And like, I've heard you talk about, okay, if we're going to be fighting this battle, you want to know who you're fighting against and then have a plan in place for going into battle. And could you maybe share a little bit of how just even on the milk quality side, you bring that mentality into that game?
I think that when you approach things and you look at even problems that you can expect to have periodically or the unexpected problems, I think the word I always use, I learned it from who I work for now and for my dad, is we call it a sense of emergency. And we go to things that don't seem like a big deal today, but we treat it like we're putting the fire out. And that keeps us from having those train wrecks. And you're always putting those little fires out. So to come to a place like this and not carry that sense of emergency, to me, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
You have to have that. When everybody does it different ways, everyone has ways that works for them. But for me, I want to treat every little problem like it's a big problem. So it doesn't lead to things that cost us in the long run in the bigger picture.
Yeah. And even going back to that milk quality example, right? I mean, share with us, what have you invested in for resources here right at the dairy so that you can know exactly what you're fighting when it comes to milk quality?
Yeah, so we have a microbiology lab that it's the forefront of the dairy. It protects us. It looks at everything from what's in the bedding, which contains the organisms that causes mastitis. So we use that to identify things, and it does lead us and influence us on how we handle that specific case.
Yeah. And so here again, what you've just called out is knowing your opponent and then reacting with that urgency.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. If you're in a game or a situation where it's built, and we say this a lot, we're built on results, and that measures our success is where we get those results and how we get there. I think that you definitely have to know the battles and who your opponent is. I think that's very important.
And now I think this lesson hits differently for those of us that tend to be optimistic, to see the good. Sometimes we overlook the fact that there is an enemy who seeks to destroy us, to interfere with our mission, to serve out the purpose God has planned in our lives. Sometimes these opponents are obvious, but other times they can be disguised even as too much of a good thing, because the devil tempts us with distraction. He wants to dilute our focus. He wants us to spend more time scrolling than serving. He wants us to shift our energy, our time from our purpose to the things that don't matter: drama, gossip, envy. And knowing your opponent means knowing your own weaknesses. In fact, Tommy Hirsch talked about this when we recapped his experience with the 75 Hard Challenge.
Total transparency, the taking control of alcohol, I think, is like in our world, like that thing, there's an itch that alcohol scratches for a leader that soothes anxiety that is pretty powerful and pretty dangerous. And so I was really happy with that reset and looking forward to that again. Honestly, I know that's this moment of total vulnerability. It's a temptation that, if I'm not careful, could have some pretty devastating effects in my life.
Great leaders are able to see both obvious threats and internal ones, and develop the discipline to guard against destruction. And that leads us right into the next lesson on preparing yourself for the opportunities and obstacles. This is lesson number 4. Great leaders know how to optimize their performance. Now, growing up in the farming community, many of us have been a part of this culture that glorifies self-sacrifice. overworking, undersleeping, stretching ourselves thin between the demands of the farm, our family, and maybe some volunteer activities. But what I've learned about great leaders is that they realize their health, nutrition, and lifestyle are key to their personal performance, how they show up each day, and that the more rested, energized, and optimal they are, the more their teams and families benefit from it. Let's take an endurance athlete who is also a dairyman, Jordan Matthews from Rosie Lane in Watertown, Wisconsin. Now, Jordan runs ultras. These are trail runs that span anywhere from 50 to 70 miles, 12 hours at times of straight running. And when he joined me here on the show, he talked about the importance of prioritizing health, not just for himself, but for his team.
So farmers traditionally work hard. When things are tough, they work harder. They forget to sleep. They get up, pound a bunch of Mountain Dews, maybe a couple coffees in there to dilute the Mountain Dews. If we're using science to preach that our product is healthy, why are we throwing some not healthy products in our body? And on the farm, we very much stay active. But is it the right kind of activity? Are we preparing our bodies for that every day? I'll never forget a visit I took up at Riverview in Minnesota, and they do stretching before they milk cows every day. So while we don't do that quite yet at Rosie Lane, we certainly have talked about that, and we have conversations about, let's make sure we consume water during the day, not just energy drinks. Make sure you sleep at night. But a healthy overall lifestyle, I think, is important. And when we do that, we've seen better performance of our people. When we have high performing people on our team, our cows are able to perform to their best because they're getting treated the best. So it all aligns with our vision of great people, great cows, great returns. But it's paying attention to people, coaching people, that if we can live a little healthier. I mean, no one has ever felt bad after taking a walk outside. No one regrets drinking a glass of milk. How many people have you heard in their life say, like, I probably should stop drinking soda, right? And so it's pretty simple. Like, did that make me a better person by that action? And
now, perhaps you heard Greg Bethard, CEO of High Plains Ponderosa Dairy, on the show recently, but one of the parts of our conversation that actually didn't make the cut was an aside that he and I had about health and nutrition. Now, Greg is a runner also, and he has dialed in on his nutrition to keep up a running commitment of several miles a week, a few times a week, and a weekly long run of 16 miles or more. In fact, he's what you call a barefoot runner, wearing these minimalist shoes that he's found improve his form and his stride. And he sees this as foundational for long-term health, longevity, and vitality. Because even though he's in his mid-50s, he is not slowing down one bit. Lesson number 3, great leaders not only have a vision, they expand their vision. When I sat down with Dr. Don Niles last summer, he recounted his days as a partner to John Pagel, the patriarch of Pagel family businesses. And he talked about leaving Kewaunee County and taking these trips with John out west, which gave him the ideas for dairying at scale in a way no one near them was doing yet in the 1990s.
Interestingly enough, we went up to Idaho because we wanted to look at freestall barns. And John had not gotten good information, so when he got there, we found those were all open lot dairies. So we actually took a builder with us, but there were no buildings for him to look at. But we talked to those dairymen, and the dairy industry is amazing. We'd be there visiting a person we'd never met before, and at some point he'd just invite us into his house to sit down and have a cup of coffee and talk about what they're doing and what their plans are. And you couldn't have gone to somebody who owned any kind of a business and would bring his future competitors into his house to talk about how to improve his business and in turn your business. But that's what we found in the dairy industry.
Jim Ostrom shared a similar memory when Tim Abbott and I sat down with him and John Vosters from Milk Source at World Dairy Expo last year.
When I was here at World Dairy Expo as commercial exhibits manager, part of my job is we went to the Tulare Farm Show. And I saw a 1,000 cow dairy, and I was blown away. I could not believe it. And I came back and I started sketching out little business plans for a 1,000 cow dairy, and I had no idea how to do it. But in tangent to that, I think at the same time, the curtain sidewall freestall barn was sort of being perfected to an acceptable level, and that made it possible to make cows comfortable freestalls instead of concrete beds. They were sand beds and open ventilation, and lo and behold, we could do that here in a cold climate in Wisconsin. And there was a few other producers at that time that were doing it, and we could see it firsthand. And that was kind of our beginning.
These visions were for the future. They don't spend time dwelling in the past. And these leaders know that a vision is created by what you see with your eyes, hear with your ears, and connect with the opportunity in your mind before others can even see it as reality. And that's why we must pay attention to the content we consume and the voices we listen to. Tara Vanderdusen said it on the show once, you become the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So I challenge you, think about who are your top 5? And are their voices building you up or keeping you stuck? Sometimes we can't control the people we interact with every day. Sometimes there's a toxicity in our environment. And sadly, sometimes it's even in our own families. But you get to choose. That's the great thing about podcasts is you can pick the voices and the influences that are in your ears that shape the way you think and act. So choose your top 5 wisely. And I hope I can help you do that right here on the Uplevel Dairy Podcast. Because as you expand your vision, you may find that your role changes. You are now called to serve in capacity that's reflective of your future and not just your past. Like Tommy Ersch, for example, has taken on a new role as a visionary of Swiss Lane Farms.
I'm now solely in the visionary seat, which is really cool, but there's a lot of challenge there for me. And part of the challenge is our business big enough to really need a full-time visionary? All of my partners and co-managers, the rest of our leadership team has really kind of thought that this is the right path. And so I'm embracing the visionary role, trying to learn what are the things that I need to do and what are my giftings and areas of strength that I need to stay in to really move our company forward.
Lesson number 2, great leaders practice a positive mindset. And I say practice very intentionally here because it's not easy to be positive every day, especially when life hits you hard over and over again. Another one who sticks out, a recent guest who is also a Dutch immigrant, but dealt a different hand of challenges, Sander Penterman from Dutch Dairy in Thorpe, Wisconsin. His story is one of perseverance, buying a bankrupt dairy and bit by bit expanding and growing it into a successful operation today, but with setbacks along the way. A barn collapse, but nothing that can compare to the devastating loss of a child. Even through that darkness, Sander has found that a positive mindset can get him through to the brighter days. The 25 years that you've been dairying here in Wisconsin, the challenges that you've not only faced, but have overcome, and what it all keeps coming back to is what you have wrapped up with today too. It's that positive mindset, the positive focus, and the optimism that tomorrow is a new day.
Yep.
Positivity stems from counting our blessings, just as Eric Paula from Paula Dairy said when I asked him about the words he lives by.
I think my only words I live by is to just be thankful. Just every day be thankful for whatever it is that's great that day. Be thankful, because there's a lot of things out there that people have to deal with that are much more difficult than things that I have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So I'm just thankful for, our business, my family, our health, friends. So just rain, whatever's that day, just be thankful.
And finally, lesson number 1. The number 1 lesson that I've picked up from more than 200 interviews with dairy leaders is this: great leaders have not just a sense of purpose, but a profound sense of purpose. They know exactly why they're getting out of bed in the morning. They are living for something bigger than themselves, bigger than their lifetime. They are living for a legacy that will be here when they're gone. And that's what keeps a woman with terminal cancer making the most of each day as a mentor to dairy youth, Katie Coyne. What is your why? How would you define your why, Katie?
Well, I think there's kind of 3 steps to that answer. The first one is someone did it for me. When I was growing up, we had this really great 4-H agent, and there were a lot of Coyne cousins and my brothers and sister, and that poor guy, but he took us to every He was our judging coach. Took us to every judging conference. When I was on the New York State 4-H judging team, he took us to Harrisburg. He just was I know he was paid for what he did, but I'm sure he volunteered a lot as well. So when we were growing up, we took our own cattle to shows. And in 1975, I was really young, but I had bought a calf, and my dad was really busy with his business, so someone took that calf to a show for us, which in those days was completely foreign to me and not nearly like it is today. And these people took this calf to the show for me and got her ready, and she won her class at the Eastern National in Harrisburg. And I just was like, I can't believe these people did this for me. So the beginning of my why is someone did it for me. And the second piece of my why is I'm a little bit competitive. So it's fun for me to find a person who I see something in that they maybe don't even see in themselves, and to say to them, this is something you could do, or you can win this showmanship. It's going to take a lot of work. And there are kids who come into this with their parents don't show cattle, or never even seen a cow, and they've gotten into it for some reason. And I like to see that person and say, hey, this is what I can teach you, and then you can do with it what you need to do. You can show cattle, and I'll take you along with me. I'll give you this calf. I'll take you to the show. We'll do what we need to do. And then they become the cool kid. So the competitive part of me wants to find those kids and teach those kids. And the other reason is, and I could say this in my family, both my siblings and my children, is I think we get this from my mom, but I'm not sure. But we see a need and say, can we do something to fulfill that need? And so that looking for a need and being brave enough to say, is this going to work? There's some cases today where I think, should I say something? And I have nothing left to lose, so I might as well just say it and see if something happens from it. But it's definitely a personality trait in our family, for sure, because we're all a little vocal about where we see a need.
Yeah, and what you just shared, Katie, what really stands out to me in that story of what has made up your why, these multiple pieces and parts, is that you have that ability to see beyond what's right in front of you, and to also see it from the perspective of the highest and greatest good. And that highest and greatest good it always comes back to that youth, to that individual, or multiple individuals, and providing them with an opportunity that you can see for them that, as you said, maybe they don't even see in themselves yet, but you can provide those little nudges and that little path to their version of success that they might not even be able to visualize yet, but you can see it for them and you can see it in them. And it was also so neat how you tied that into that powerful experience you had as a youth when someone took you under their wing. And again, they didn't have to do that. Just like you didn't have to do the things that you have done to pour your heart and to call out potential in individuals, but you still do it. And then that's also part of your own why. And that's to be that person that does for others what someone once did for you. And I'll never forget the conversation with New Mexico dairyman Jack Pirtle, because when he shared his purpose, I realized that as a messenger of his message, I was living mine too.
Everything I do is for God's glory. And so right now, with this, it's kind of their thing. And so a 4-pillar man, working on my faith, my family, my finance, and my fitness. And I think faith-wise for me, if you kind of get that fixed and you get that kind of focus back on the right spot, then all this other stuff kind of falls into place. At the end of the day, did we show up? Did we do everything in God's glory? And are we going to heaven? And that's basically kind of what I wake up for.
And one final statement to wrap this up comes from a woman who has pulled herself up by her bootstraps while grieving the loss of her father and husband at the same time. and who chooses to live each day as a light to others. Jamie Pagel Witz-Pollock from Pagel Family Businesses.
We don't know when this life is over. We don't know what our journey looks like, but we only have the ruler of life. So even if you look at that ruler, where you at on that ruler, you only have so much time. So what can you do to bring yourself joy? Because this is all you got. You have one life to live. And I think we spend so much time living everybody else's lives or just trying to get through the day or trying to get through the week or run around with our kids and do all these things, but we don't make the time to make ourselves feel better.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed these 7 lessons in leadership that you can apply to business, to work, but more importantly, to life. When you get home at the end of the day, when you wake up in the morning, embody a few of these little lessons and ask yourself, how can you uplevel yourself? So until next time, I'm Peggy Coffeen. Keep learning, keep growing, and keep upleveling your dairy.